This week, we welcome Tony Howlett, Chief Information Security Officer of SecureLink, to discuss managing third-party risk. In the Leadership and Communications segment, the elements of a good company apology, 8 ways leaders delegate successfully, there's no shame in working on vacation, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Security can't solve crucial problems when they have to wade through thousands of alerts a day. With ServiceNow, you can easily prioritize and respond to your most crucial business threats. That way you can go from overwhelmed to under control. ServiceNow brings security, risk, and IT together on one platform. Learn more at securityweekly.com/ServiceNow. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked and more of a question of when. Once the attacker has passed your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business. And there's one security solution that delivers it all, NetScout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NetScout. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 141, recorded August 26, 2019. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island are my co-hosts Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque.
How we doing,
Hello,
gents?
everyone.
What's going on?
Got you guys back in studio together again.
Back in the studio,
Yes.
sharing a cigar.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't get them until tomorrow when I fly in. Boo-hoo.
Oh, there'll be plenty. Don't worry, man.
I
Smoke
know.
them all.
I see the budget.
Plenty of cigars.
We have exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We are now partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you'll be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for one of our upcoming webcasts with Signal Sciences, Endgame, or Logarithm, or all 3, by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them in our on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. So many of the big East Coast cybersecurity trade shows take place in crowded cities like Boston and New York, where parking is a nightmare and will cost you an arm and a leg. However, this year's Compass Cybersecurity Symposium is being held at Twin River Casino in Lincoln, Rhode Island, just 15 minutes outside of Providence. The venue has plenty of free and easy parking. Speakers include social engineering expert Chris Hadnagy and Security Weekly podcast founder Paul Asadorian. Oh, that's you.
Mr.
Yay.
Paul.
Use
coming
discount
up.
code SW2019 to save $20 on registration. All right, let's get into our interview. Tony Howlett is a published author and speaker on various security, compliance, and technology topics. He has served as a technical C-level at various companies since 1994. He's currently the Chief Information Security Officer of SecureLink, a vendor privilege access management company based in Austin, Texas. He is also the Vice President of ISC Squared Austin chapter and an advisory member of GIAC and SANS. Tony, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hello. Hi, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you and I connected. Every month I try to bring a CISO onto the show. We have a practicing CISO as a co-host, but I always like to bring CISOs in and get different perspectives and help CISOs learn from other CISOs. And when you and I connected, obviously we have some commonality around third-party vendor management. But before we get into that, give us a quick background, kind of your career path, how you got into the C-level and into your current role as CISO at SecureLink.
Certainly, yeah. Well, I always say that the best way to become a C-level is to start the company, and you get to pick your title, and that's what I did. Well, actually, I was in selling computer servers and networks back when they were a thing, and decided to jump into this budding new field of internet service providers. So when the internet was becoming a thing, commercial internet in 94, 93, we started up an ISP and had a lot of fun. We learned a lot about networking, systems, and customer support, and of course security, which really wasn't as much of a concern in the beginning, but as it became more commercial and became more corporate, we had to develop better security. So after doing that and selling that company, we formed a managed security services provider, MSSP. And we did that for about 17 years. And that was a lot of fun. We did a lot of audits and pen testing, and all kinds of different things for companies. And then I went on to be CTO at Codero, a hosting company, cloud hosting. So we were going from the bare metal world into the cloud and helping companies make that transition. And of course, now I'm here at SecureLink, helping companies secure their third-party vendor connections.
Yeah, and in third party's always been an interesting area for me. It's in my early days of security consulting, I was doing the basic kind of scanning, assessment kind of work. But in 2003, I went to one of the large financials, and my job there was to manage 70,000 vendors. This was during Graham Leach Bliley and the OCC making mandates around third-party vendor management in the financials managing risk. And I ended up building a startup out of that in the GRC space and spent some time over at RSA and Archer working in that space. But it's an interesting challenge because I don't think a lot of organizations still do it very well. I think it's still a big hole that hasn't been solved. And it's one of those areas that not a lot of people pay attention to.
Yeah, you're right. And it's interesting. We spent most of our time in the financial sector when I was doing that. And they tend to have the best understanding because they are not only regulated, but examined every year, as you know. But most other companies, and even in the financial sector, we find the third-party security is kind of the redheaded stepchild. So you'll secure your servers, you can get your handle around, your networks and all that. But when it comes to vendors, we find even a lot of folks don't have a firm understanding of how many people are accessing their network or systems. They might say, well, we only have a couple. And you start digging and scraping and talking to other departments. Turns out you have 20 or 40 or 60. The average, there was a study, the average company has 67 vendors coming into their system some way or another. So it's almost always more than they think. And it's often more critical systems than they think. And of course, more privileged accounts, vendors that have those highly valuable system administrator and privileged accounts where they can, really do a lot of damage if a hacker gets a hold of them.
I wish it were 67 because it was 70. It was over 70,000. And to your point, right? The business makes these relationships with these third parties to outsource a service or function. And if you don't have centralized procurement, which this bank didn't at the time, you don't even know where they are. The way I found them, actually, is I had to go to the general ledger to see who was on the accounts payable list to figure out who were we paying. Were they people that we knew about or not? And that's where I actually started, and then had to go find the business unit that owned them just so we could classify them. I mean, that just the visibility side is a huge problem.
Oh, yeah. And now with the cloud, it's even worse. You can have this massive amount of shadow IT, and it's on some marketing person's credit card. I mean, we've seen AWS accounts, which of course you can open up with a credit card, hosting, again, all kinds of databases. We saw this with the Capital One breach of just massive customer databases sitting in a cloud environment. So yeah, it's really hard to track down. And like you said, we've done the same thing. You go to accounting, you look at the AP, or you try to look at the credit card accounts. It's really hard to get a handle on it unless you do some network analysis. And with cloud, you're not going to find that. There's actually vendors now that will help you find and suss out. They'll look at the traffic to and from vendors. But I mean, you've got incredibly sensitive data sitting in, say, Salesforce or some of these SaaS vendors, databases. So it's not just, your Word docs and Office 365. It can be your crown jewels sitting out there in the cloud where you don't have a lot of control or visibility into what's going on.
The frightening part for me is in the scenarios you're describing, like someone could be really shadowy in IT, right? Because, I mean, the VPN is largely going away or gone away, right? Because we have these SaaS offerings where I can authenticate, even if it's with a corporate credentials, I don't really need a VPN to access things like Salesforce or anything like that. And now I'm a remote employee. How do you monitor what I'm doing? How do you, take my credit card and I go buy some stuff in Amazon's cloud and I go put some stuff up there. I can't see the network. I'm not VPN'd. How do I know about that?
And outsourcing, and now they're calling it out-tasking, is becoming so prevalent throughout organizations, right? Where even your AP is now outsourced, right? So accounts payable, accounts receivable, things of that nature. And a lot of times I'll hear, even from our clients, just treat them like our internal employee, giving them the same privileges, giving them the same rights, giving them the same access, and it sets my little hair that I have on fire because they need to be viewed differently, right? And I look at these type of vendors as you get the access you need when you need it at the time you need it, and that's it, right? So that almost that just-in-time type access, because again, they're a threat vector to the organization, and everything is getting outsourced these days.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you said that. I don't know if you talked to my marketing department, but that's kind of our tagline is vendors are a different animal, right? Because you do get the VPNs. What I tell people is if you think of a VPN, it's literally like a long Ethernet cord. It's just an extension of your network. You just kind of stretch it out there or halfway around the world. It was never designed for any kind of management. It was really designed just to secure the communications and extend your LAN, right? But there isn't really, and now there's, they're starting to layer on some of the zero trust things, some more management, but you're layering it on top of this idea of just let's get them on the network. And this particular vendor may just need to talk to this one server, this one database, but now they've got broad spectrum access to all of the HR servers and all the databases, which is no big deal if they're doing their job right. But if the hacker gets a hold of it, they're going to scan that network. They're going to find the least secured, most vulnerable server, which could be anything. I use this in my presentations. I use this. It's true, but it's an anecdote. Is this casino got hacked, and they looked and they searched and they searched, and it turned out the device that was doing where they made their foothold was a internet connected fish tank. So they were hacked by fish. Literally, they got a hold of that sensor, and I'm sure, again, in their risk assessments, I bet that wasn't even on the list. It was, they were checking servers and PCs and maybe mobile, and this little bitty temperature monitor inside the fish tank probably didn't even raise an eyebrow, and yet they got hacked through it.
That's a whole different type of phishing attack definition,
Right.
isn't it?
That's right. It's a good one. I didn't even think about that. I have to use that.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't resist. It's a fish tank. But now, so we know these are issues, right? Finding them is a difficult part, but you can't treat them the same. The other part of this is they're different animals. To Jason's point, which is depending on what they have access to, you have to treat them differently. Now, granted, the janitor has access to your trash, but maybe that's not a big concern. But if you've got access to very sensitive data from your customers, you have to treat them differently. How do you start the classification process and really understand where the risk is with these third-party providers?
And like I think Jason said, the outsourcing is not getting less, it's getting more. It used to be the thought, let's outsource back office functions, non-critical functions. But now you see things like hospitals outsourcing their medical devices, things that are attached to people, defibrillators, insulin pumps, drug pumps. They all have IP addresses. You guys were at DEF CON. I was DEF CON, this giant ballroom full of medical devices that people are working away on and finding all these vulnerabilities. So I think, the first thing you really want to look at when you risk assess vendors is who's getting with privileged accounts. And that itself is a discovery process. It's not often easy, but you can kind of begin to say, well, this company just provides desktop support. Let's put them on a different tier, than these guys getting into these medical devices, or this guy doing maintenance on our database or on our dev environment or what have you. So those privileged accounts definitely are the ones you want to look at more carefully and treat differently in terms of using like PAM, privileged access management, and vendor PAM, which is what we do. So because those are the things that are going to cause you the most grief, an exponential amount of grief if they get compromised, versus a secretary or a support person's account. Yes, they can escalate. There's definitely a lot, there's risk there, but it's not the same as if a database administrator or a Windows domain administrator get popped.
Yeah, and does that also account for some of these SaaS solutions? Because you think about, you're outsourcing your sales function, customer data. You're potentially outsourcing HR, which is a bunch of private data about folks, and you have to think about those privileged accounts as well, not just other database systems either.
Yeah, for sure. You look at some of what's in there. Your Office 365 administrator. That main person may not be a highly ranked IT person, but they have access to the entire, productivity suite of a company, the Word docs, the databases, the emails, and that one administrator has immense power. And then, you look at Salesforce, any of these, of course, NetSuite. So, if you're HR or your ADP administrator, and now I start to see some of these companies providing dual factor authentication. But you really, it's a high target if you can get into someone's HR system and change the payroll data. So when payroll goes through, all that money transfers out to accounts they've set up. And we've seen that happen a number of times where they've just gone in, the amounts are the same and they're going to different accounts. So that doesn't flip a switch until the employees wonder where their direct deposit is a couple of days later. And they go, oh my gosh, it all went to these accounts in Africa. So these SaaS vendors and these SaaS third parties, they have in some cases existential power over the company. If you lose a payroll or two, or again your entire productivity suite is corrupted. Doesn't have to be your main database of customers to put you out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think from my perspective, we typically like to look at our third-party vendors, because we're also on the receiving end, right? Because we're an IT services and managed services company, so we're on the receiving end of a lot of those vendor risk management assessments. But when we're partnering with organizations, we really like to look at them in a couple of aspects: operational risk, security risk, right? Because again, in some instances, we outsource some of the facilities tasks. Well, they could have access to our network operations center, which in turn, if we have any documentation there, they could see the documentation or see something on a screen, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking at it from a security and an operational risk. You mentioned the janitors, right? They have access to pretty much every room, right? The CEO's office. So we have to look at it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, it's and again, the vendors for the most part want to do the right thing.
Sure. Yeah.
We have a vendor product, and to them, obviously not getting hacked is pretty darn important, but also to being able to provide documentation and audit records to their customers, and not having 15 different access technologies, or even, I think, again, we saw a stat that each technology vendor has an average of 238 customers they're dealing with. So they may have 238 different access methods. You got a VPN over here, you got another VPN over there, you've got, this technology, that technology, and all those have to be managed. So that's driving it as well. As the vendors want to do right, they want to provide a secure environment, and it can be a competitive advantage. If you say, hey, we're compliant with all these stats and we can provide this documentation, we can show you. And that's when we used to do bank audits. If we found a vendor that could provide that information, we automatically felt more comfortable with them, because we always knew where they were and they were able to tell us easily, versus the company that said, well, we'll give you this ledger that says when we log in, and, spreadsheet, and you kind of have to hope and pray that that's maintained and correct.
Yeah, and you actually, you brought up a good point and reminded me that in a lot of instances, organizations aren't actually looking downstream and requiring their vendors to make sure that they have strong vendor risk management programs. Because now you're talking
it's a chain.
Fourth party, fifth party, whatever the case may be.
Well, it's like an SSL certificate chain, right?
We call it nth party risk.
Yeah.
The vendor, my vendor's vendor, again, especially with cloud, you may have a vendor that's using AWS to store your data in S3, or they may use the technology, and that vendor may use, you could go all day and try to suss out these deeper relationships, but it's definitely something that I think companies should be asking is, do you use a cloud vendor to store our data, or where is it stored? Because people get into sovereign issues with GDPR and other things. Because if they're shipping it halfway across the world, that could bring you into violation. I saw Delta Airlines is suing their chatbot vendor. They got hacked, and it was through their chatbot vendor based in the Philippines, which I guess for me would have been probably red flag number one.
Right out of the gate.
Yes, it's in the Philippines, but they were using a single shared credential for all their access, and that got hacked. And of course, they were able to stay in the system and scrape a lot of data out of Delta's system. But and that's if I had to tell companies, if there's one thing they could do, like there's so much they need to do, and if there's one thing that they would take from this, it would be eliminate shared credentials everywhere you can.
Absolutely.
Just that one thing will probably bring you more security than almost any other action relating to third party risk.
Well, I think software today largely suffers from poor credentials management, including the software that I'm working on right now. And now I sympathize with developers because some of it sits in the chain of the software actually working. It's in the critical path of the job the software is supposed to do. Right. So if I do implement a secrets vault, or you implement it in your software, right, now it's in the chain. I got to go get credentials in order for the software to function. And then they expire, so maybe I got to go get new ones. And if that process breaks, so does your application, right? But I agree that it is probably one of the worst problems in security today is it having to do with authentication, authorization, and credentials, whether it's a completely open S3 bucket or whether it's the application, like the example from the development in the Philippines that's just reusing the same key. I think that's rampant. In fact, so rampant that GitHub has added checks that when you check code into GitHub, it goes, hey, that looks like a Google API key. You probably shouldn't be doing that. Right? Yeah. That's how bad the problem is. Right.
Well, API security, and that's again, we have vendors that are using your API, or maybe we just published in it. We created an API in the SDK, and now we're having to integrate that into our pen testing because API abuse is huge. And it's with the number of things that's infrastructure as code and DevOps and now DevSecOps, you really have to think about, how is that code going to get authorized and how is it going to get used and what can it do? Because if it can be misused, someone will figure out a way to abuse it.
Right. And it's not only that, the test in this case, in the context of this discussion, shouldn't be, I can gain access to a key, right? There's a lot more investigation that needs to happen. And the APIs that I'm working with, right, there's some hurdles that an attacker would have to overcome, right? There's different sets of there's the credential that authorizes my app to talk to a user. In some cases, a physical person with a web browser has to grant that application access. In other cases, applications are talking to each other, but there's other safeguards like the URLs that are being used. There's multiple sets of client IDs and secrets, so only half of it maybe isn't a log entry, for example. There's other safeguards, but to your point, Tony, is that I think having pen testers in our software that can really kind of dig in and tell you how bad the issue is important, because it's not necessarily as black and white as GitHub is making it.
Yeah, if you have, you need to have pen testers poking at your APIs and the software pieces of it, because so much of the credentialing and authentication is happening program to program, versus a person trying to get authenticated to a system. So you definitely need to think about that and have testing and controls in place for that side of things. Certainly all your employees and vendors and remote employees need to have that needs to be strong, but don't stop there.
Yeah, and just because you can make it, like, let's say you have your vendors and they're being scanned or whatever, just because the API is exposed doesn't mean it's insecure either. I mean, you have to look at, if the data is the same data that you can get by visiting the website, it's a non-issue. That's working as designed, right? But some people will take that to be there's a vulnerability. So there's, I think, some education on this front that needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see so many shared accounts, because managing all these service accounts and all these individual accounts, they just one big shared account, everything's the same, it all works, right? But that's also the danger, because now you have access to everything.
Until your development environment trips your quota, and then your production app is broken.
Right.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got these 67 average vendors or what have you, and say each vendor has an average of 5, 10 reps, some of them might have hundreds. And you're the administrator, and you've got to put all these you're going to create individual accounts for 300 GE reps, or are you going to, I understand the practicality of that, and sometimes it's unavoidable, but anywhere you can root that out, and one of the issues we see too is often when you're managing a vendor accounts in your own Active Directory, your own authentication scheme, there is a lag between onboarding and offboarding. So if a rep leaves somewhere, they might still be active in your domain server for weeks, months, just depends on your process. So we encourage folks to move towards automation and delegating some of that down towards the vendor, because generally their HR processes are pretty immediate. Most companies, if they terminate someone, they're going to have them out of their system that day. So relying more on that than you are any kind of manual processes or syncing with, doing a once a month or once every few weeks sync up. Who left? Okay, we got new people. And the more you can automate, the better.
Tony, do you see federated identity as an area that can help this? When I worked at university, I actually was the few cubicles down from the founder of the Shibboleth project. And really, from listening to him, even on the phone, I learned a lot about federated identity. It sounds like, in this case, right, what it means is organizations can trust each other and sync accounts in an automated fashion, right?
Being able to federate to the vendor's AD or some form of that, I think it's almost a given. I mean, it's getting out of hand to manage, again, hundreds, maybe thousands of vendor IDs, and you don't have that visibility, right? You don't have that real-time information about that person or whoever they are, what their employment status is. So I think it's going to have to go that direction. Most companies are moving that direction, but it's a big ship to move. And
it's not trivial, certainly.
And then for privileged accounts, add an additional layer of security. That's probably where multi-factor and some other things come in to make sure that those privileged accounts are definitely more secure than the base user accounts.
Absolutely. Like I said, those are the crown jewels. If they get that, it's the jackpot. And as we probably all know, and studies have shown, system administrators don't tend to actually have sometimes poor security in the sense that they feel they don't change their passwords as often because they might be longer. And the practices like the Sony hack came out of an administrator credential that was ridiculously easy. Same with the Delta chatbot hack. So technologies like the privilege access management, PAM, or vendor PAM in our case, where those identities are in a vault and they're checked in and out, so we know how much they're being used. We can control them tighter. They're just not written on a sticky note somewhere. And that's the issue. You don't have a whiteboard in the vendor's office that says, the ID for SecureLink is blah, and the ID for Acme is blah. So yeah, I think layering on PAM or VPAM for vendors is critical, especially if they're using privileged accounts. You can't just manage those in your Active Directory and make them administrators. That's right. And even for your own internal, I think companies are moving towards this for their internal because they have so many administrators and the PAM technology now will rotate those passwords and change them so often with super complex it's humans could never keep up with it. So I think it's the right way to go. it's definitely one part of the puzzle, but it's a big part of it.
Yeah, identity is it's a big challenge. It's one of those key areas. I think just it continues regardless of where technology sits. You still have to provide people access to it, and identity is a big challenge.
Yeah, and that's another thing I like to throw in there. It's the old security versus access, and it's on a spectrum, right? So you have to provide the efficiency. So if you're getting people into the system, and there's some incredibly, you have to provide a blood sample and your birth certificate and all this other stuff, people are going to work around that. The systems you implement and the onboarding and offboarding processes need to be efficient enough so you can get the vendors in the system and they can do the work they need to do, because it's critical, right? In a lot of cases. But you're doing the right things with controls and so forth. So you've got to balance that. You can't just lock those credentials in a vault and seal it, cement it off, and throw away the key. And again, I think automation is the key there too, is being able to automate those processes so they can flow smoothly while doing what they have to do.
Great. Paul, Jason, any other questions for Tony while we have him?
Good to go. This has been great.
Absolutely.
Tony, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
No, thank you very much. It's been great. Appreciate it.
We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.